Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about the legendary lords of Total War Pharaoh, or rulers as they are called in-game. Personally, I'm just going to use the term legendary lord. Now, looking at the Hittites first, and the Canaanites, and the Egyptians. What matters with the legendary lord?
Hittites.
Well, there's no uniqueness in terms of their combat ability, I think. There might be some differences, but really the differences come down to their faction units, their buildings, and then we're also looking at commands and titles. I think there's uniqueness when it comes to titles. So what are commands? Commands are either an active or a passive effect you do gain throughout your campaign. Basically, you have an active effect that you can use until Shamsu Hor. If you haven't used it, you get the passive effect. If you have used it, you don't get anything at Shamsu Hor, and you have to decide whether or not you're going to use the active command again. Now, looking at Suppiluliuma, the king of Hatti, the great king of Hatti, who starts as a king, that is a significant benefit. His command gives him replenishment for all of his armies, a significant replenishment benefit. This, if it's an active effect. This is a significant benefit, especially later on in the campaign when replenishment starts going under as civilization collapses. But if you decide not to go with replenishment, on Shamsu Hor you'll get an increase in workforce until the next Shamsu Hor cycle. Now, workforce is the surplus point, the growth of the game. So every building requires workforce. If you're going to build it, it works pretty well as a system. Now, title-wise, Suppiluliuma increases your army's defense and replenishment and helps to keep your provinces stable in a campaign. Suppiluliuma is certainly defense-oriented, because he has rogue armies spawning from the north to the west and from the sea. So he's in the middle of all of the rogue armies, all the sea peoples, all the invaders that are going to be coming to try and bring about the end of civilization. Thing about the end of civilization is if civilization states decline, the rogue armies, the sea peoples, the desert nomads, they become stronger. So you want to prevent that from happening. Now, in terms of his native units, faction units, and buildings, well, native units can be accessed by everyone, but as long as you're making your way to a similar territory like Suppiluliuma. But in terms of his faction units, he's very focused on the defense. He has Hittite Spearmen at tier 3, and he does start with the tier 3 settlement, so he has Hittite Spearmen, Hittite Axemen. He has a bunch of heavy infantry units. He lacks in archers, he lacks in ranged units, but he has heavy melee, some of the best in the game. Not necessarily the best damage dealers in the game, because Axemen have a split between melee damage and armor piercing melee damage, though they do get a bonus versus shield. Spearmen have bonus against chariots, and you're not necessarily going to see a huge amount of chariots in a campaign. And then at tier 4 we get swordsmen, Hattusan swordsmen, we get Hattusan archers, and at tier 5 veteran Hittite spearmen and veteran Hittite axemen. Heavy infantry, not necessarily the best damage, but certainly the best survivability. Gods can also matter, because when you start a campaign you will have a god associated to the legendary lord you're playing, and you will not be able to change that, but not necessarily too important, I would argue. He does start worshipping Arena. You can always change that. The way gods work, you can have a devoted general to a god. You can basically have one army devoted to a god, and then you can build shrines and temples for a particular god for various benefits. And that's, by the way, building shrines and temples is how you gain favor with the god. In terms of unique buildings, he has a bunch of garrison buildings, basically. So Army Supply Center for morale and upkeep, melee defense. Then 2 different garrison buildings, Garrison Quarters, which is a tier 3 building, and Royal Garrison Palace, which is a tier 4 building. When I say tier 3 or tier 4, it depends on the number of workforce, this icon over here, how many of those. So like a tier 4 building costs 4, a tier 5 building costs 5, and so on. Then he gets the Safe Haven, which is a tier 3 building that gives happiness, workforce growth, and food income. Food, by the way, is an issue in Hatti. Like, they have a good amount of wood, decent amounts of gold, stone, not necessarily as much bronze, but they are lacking in terms of food compared to the Egyptian. So like Hatti is very dominant in terms of wood, Egypt is very dominant in terms of food. Also, I would say Egypt has quite a bit more bronze than Hatti does as well. But you're not necessarily going to struggle too much in anything besides food. Well, bronze is always something you're going to struggle in pretty much every campaign. It doesn't matter who you are. Then we look at Kurunta, the challenger.
Stag god
now,
reborn.
here's the thing about Suppiluliuma. He starts as a great king. one of the benefits of a great king or a pretender to the throne is that you can vassalize other factions. This is something Kurunta doesn't have. You first need to kick off a civil war, which will start a war between yourself and Suppiluliuma, which is not necessarily something you want to easily do. So Kurunta's campaign, I would strongly argue that it is the more challenging of the two campaigns. Like, of these campaigns, it's like the starting position is argued that, oh, Suppiluliuma has a harder starting position. I would say Kurunta, like Suppiluliuma though, has a lot more potential than Kurunta and many others, because he starts as a great king. He doesn't have to wage a civil war to become one. He has all of the benefits that a great king does. His position is complicated, sure, because of the diplomacy aspect, but you can manage that. Now, looking at Kurunta, Kurunta is more focused on damage dealing than he is on defense. I mean, he still has plenty of heavily armored units, so he still gets Hittite spearmen, but he gets Hittite chargers. Now, Hittite chargers are also axemen, so they have that split between melee damage, armor piercing, and also bonus against shields. He also gets Phrygian mercenaries, which are less heavily armored than the Hittite axemen. But what's quite important when we're looking at Kurunta, he gets Caspian clubmen. So clubmen do pure armor piercing damage. So he's gonna get a good amount of armor piercing damage in his armies. The way I describe the difference between Kurunta and Suppiluliuma in terms of their armies is that Kurunta is more focused on damage dealing, whereas Suppiluliuma is more focused on defense. Like, especially you get Hittite Vanguard at tier 5, which are really heavily armored, 90 armor with pure armor piercing damage. And also chariots. Both Suppiluliuma and Kurunta have some of the most heavily armored chariots in the game, some of the best chariots in the game. I don't think using light chariots is really a great idea in a campaign. In terms of commands, he can either gain more income from raising settlements, but his armies will not be able to colonize ruins until the next Shemsu Hor cycle. That's the active command. The passive command is that your armies will reduce the morale of enemies in battle until the next Shemsu Hor cycle. In terms of titles, his titles allow your armies to specialize in Caspian and Phrygian units, and you can unlock the shadow stance for your generals and allow them to reduce happiness in their location. That is the title benefit. In terms of buildings, he gets the military sabotage camp, so he's going to reduce the capability of, he's going to reduce the movement speed of enemy armies, he's going to reduce their melee attack, and he's going to increase his raiding income. He gets a mercenary hunting village for food income, upkeep benefit, XP, but at the cost of influence, and then he also gets the mercenary center for recruitment slots, legitimacy, recruitment rank, for certain types of units, Phrygians and Caspians, and native units, and then -2 influence for that cost. What I would say about the Hittites, something to keep in mind, is, yeah, they don't have as much food. They generally don't have as much resources. Like, Egypt in general is far more resource heavy than Hatti is. Nope, you're not going to struggle necessarily for gold. Stone might be a bit of an issue, but in general, the Hittite armies are the best in the game, flat out, given the way the game is designed. But the problem is resources. You just don't have as many as the Egyptians do have. You have a lot of wood, that's fine, but wood is not necessarily the problem. Though you are going to use that wood more than the Egyptians would in a campaign. Like, the Egyptians make use of a lot of stone for their buildings, you don't. Okay, moving on to the Canaanites. The Canaanites are kind of in a middle ground between the Egyptians and the Hittites. They don't have units that are as heavily armored or as good in combat. Because, like, yeah, heavily armored units win combat. Like, if you have heavily armored units with a lot of armor piercing, that's going to win pretty much every battle you're going to be dealing with. The Canaanites are in between the Egyptians and the Hittites over here. Same with their economy. They have a decent pool of resources, but they just don't necessarily have the same kind of economic capability that you can get in Egypt. Now, to be clear, you can play any campaign. You can play a Hittite campaign, go to Egypt, get access to the resources there. That's not necessarily too much of an issue. And ultimately, a long campaign is probably going to see you travel across the entire world, not just in your remote corner of the campaign map. So, looking at Ursu. Ursu wants to bring about the destruction of civilization. He worships Moloch, who is like basically a god of destruction, of death and destruction. If we're looking at his unique units, he gets Shabu Nagib warriors, which are medium infantry, but they have their axe infantry, so they have a good amount of armor piercing. He gets swordsmen, so decent enough line holders, and he also gets Hoopshu warriors, which are which are again axe warriors. I'd say the best unit he can get early on in his campaign are the Shasu warriors, which are native units. Everyone can get access to them, sure, if they go into a nearby area, so to speak, but they're pretty solid tier 3 infantry, decent armor, good amount of armor piercing, so you can generally, at the beginning of campaign, really rely heavily on native units. They do count in that respect. Later on, you probably want to rely more on the faction units. So you're relying on native units, just basically playing a campaign with native units alone is not necessarily a bad idea. Ursu does get a significant amount of power in the late game, though. So he gets... I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. Basically, the Axe Warriors of the King. So they're pretty strong tier 5 units. Hinku Warriors, I think it is, that are two-handed axe infantry that are also pretty solid. Spear chariots, and then basically two-handed club infantry units that you can get at tier 4. Pure armor piercing. In terms of unique buildings, if I can get rid of that, hold on a second, because tooltip issues all around. In terms of unique buildings, he gets the forced labor compound, which is a tier 2 building. He can build this in every settlement, so he gets workforce growth, food income, production of all resources in the region by 50% at the cost of free happiness. You can build one of these in every single settlement that you have in a province. He gets 1 Irsu's gold tally quarter, so he gets legitimacy, happiness, influence, production, all resources in a province, in a single province. It's unfortunate that it's only one province, because Irsu could really benefit from using this in every province he has. It is built on the provincial capital because it is a tier 4 building, and then he gets Irsu's war camp, which gives recruitment slots, recruitment rank, battle loot, and raiding income. So Irsu has a decent enough army, not as good as Suppiluliuma or as Kurunta, but he has a far less complicated campaign situation. Also, something to understand about the Canaanites, one of the benefits they have in their campaign is with legitimacy. So typically speaking, when it comes to legitimacy for Egyptians and Hittites, is that you gain legitimacy by conquering sacred lands, special territories that are in either Hatti or they're in Egypt. But if you're playing a Canaanite, either Irsu or Bay, you can gain legitimacy through research. You get a research that increases your legitimacy for every military alliance. So you can play the Master Diplomat as Irsu and gain a significant amount of legitimacy. That's how I gained the throne of Egypt, even though I didn't go too far into Egypt. And realistically, the Canaanites are in the position where they can choose if they want to go for the throne of Egypt or they want to go for the throne of Hatti. I'd probably say going for the throne of Egypt is the better choice the vast majority of times. You will have an army roster with the faction units that will defeat anything Egypt throws against you, or the vast majority of things that Egypt throws against you, whereas Hatti would be the more difficult meal to chew through. I've done both in there, so Egypt was far easier. Now, the way Irsu works is he kind of wants to bring about the downfall of civilization. Well, kind of. You can certainly play him as the kind of person who burns everything to the ground, or you may decide not to. Pros and cons, I think it's better to try and keep civilization intact. There's more power with that, as opposed to playing him with just control of one single province. But you look at this guy, you think he wants to keep civilization around? No. So when we're looking at Irsu, your active command can cause your armies to wreak havoc, decreasing civilization state, and have access to the same benefits nomadic people receive from low values. But you will not be able to occupy settlements until Shamsu Hor. If you wait until Shamsu Hor without using the active command, your faction will gain more resources from raiding stands and sacking during the current Shamsu Hor cycle. Now, here's how this works. The active command. The passive command is understood from the description alone, but the active command, here's how that works. Civilization is based on a number of points. Typically speaking, we're talking about special settlements that are called the pillars of civilization in a campaign. The more those settlements are intact, the higher their level, the more civilization points there are on the campaign map. The more you are in a prosperity as opposed to crisis and collapse. Now, when you're in a collapse, typically speaking, you're going to suffer morale, you're going to suffer replenishment, 10% replenishment, or by a bit of replenishment anyway. The way Irsu works is he can use this command to lower civilization by 20 points. It's only while it's active, so it's not permanent and it doesn't stack, but you can lower civilization with that, or I think it doesn't stack at any rate. And while the command is active, your armies lose the downsides of collapse and gain benefits. So they gain a significant amount of combat ability. They're also going to have more replenishment, which is a pretty significant buff. I'd say Ursu is kind of in a balanced state. Like, you don't want to go too far down the collapse, but you can benefit from it. Like, let's say the world's going to crap, the collapse is happening. With that, regardless of what you do, you can still be very strong during the collapse. Your armies can still be very strong because they will lose the downsides and gain some of the benefits that the nomads and sea peoples do. So realistically, Ursu in a collapse can have the strongest armies of any legendary lord on the campaign map. That is the benefit of his campaign. In terms of titles, your titles reduce your faction happiness in exchange for various bonuses. Your armies can cause fear in enemy units and gain more loot from winning battles, especially sieges. That is how Ursu operates. Then we look at Bay. Like, whereas Ursu is all about aggression and units that do a lot of damage, potentially, Bay is more defense-oriented. Though he does have his own damage dealers, don't get me wrong. But he starts with the Canaanite shield bearers and Canaanite sellswords. So he's starting with units that may not necessarily have the highest damage potential, but they have a good amount of survivability. He's more defense-oriented than Ursu is. But he does have his own damage dealers, because he does have Axemen, like with the Canaanite Vanguard. He does have the veteran Canaanite warriors, which are also Axemen. So, like Ursu, he's got a pretty powerful army. Not the best in the world, but I would say because of the native units he starts with, he's more defense-oriented than Ursu. Ursu starts with native units that are more offensive-oriented, in particular the Raiders over here, which are two-handed axe infantry.
I am but a humble
Now, if we look
servant.
at Bay, when we're talking about his commands, he can either get instant research with his active command, or if you wait until Shamsu Hor, your influence will increase in all the provinces you own. So he either gets a research benefit or he gets an influence benefit. In terms of titles, your titles provide influence on the campaign map, bonuses to range units in battle, and grant abilities that enable ambushing, such as Vanguard deployment. I would say that's not too important, but certainly he is a master of research and a master of influence. He's also got a good economy. He gets the regional fair, which increases the production of all resources by 20% in this province and 15%. I think that's supposed to mean region, or the 20% is supposed to mean region, 15% province. I don't know, it seems bugged. But at the cost of free influence. It would feel weird. Crucially, he gets the Smuggler's Bay, which gives a significant amount of food and wood, especially during a collapse. So the worse the world is, the more money Bay is going to make, especially when it comes to food and wood. But it costs happiness and it costs influence. It's a tier 2 building, by the way. He gets the singing competition for happiness and influence in this province and adjacent provinces, and then he gets the Chief Scribe headquarters for legitimacy, influence per non-aggression pact, diplomatic relations to all factions, and production of resources in adjacent province. So he can gain a significant amount of resources and influence in his campaign. I would note that Bay is in a more complicated situation than Ursu, because of the fact that he starts on the coast, and the Sea Peoples are going to certainly attack the coast. But he certainly can play that influence game very, very well. And then we get to the Egyptian, Ramesses, Seti, Tausret, and Amenmesse. Ramesses, I would say, is probably the worst legendary lord in the entire game. There are certainly some benefits that he does have, but he's lacking really in terms of the army ability. His best unit that you can get early on are the Shasu tribesmen, which certainly are decent enough due to their armor piercing, and then the Shasu warriors at tier 3 through the native units. But the problem for Ramesses is his faction units, they're all light units, and with a couple of exceptions that are medium units. So he's lacking really quite heavily in terms of the heavy infantry department. And the units that he does have that are medium are like tier 4 or tier 5. So he's really lacking in the unique unit department. He can make do with the native units in a campaign, but then again, that's not nothing special really. Ramesses, in terms of his In terms of his campaign situation, it's a bit of a complicated one. So one, the Canaanites hate you, are likely to declare war on you. Not necessarily Ursu, but the other ones certainly, the minor factions certainly will. So you're probably in a situation where you want to go in Egypt because you want to take the sacred land, to take the throne of Egypt, but at the same time you're in this complicated situation where the factions to the east hate you, the factions to the west like you, so you don't, and there's the Pharaoh of Egypt, who has a lot of vassals in this area, so you actually have a complicated situation when it comes to expanding as Ramesses, because ideally you'd want to expand into Egypt to gain sacred land, to gain legitimacy, but you have to hold the border against the Canaanites. So becoming Pharaoh is complicated for him. Then if we look at Ramesses, he gets the ability to attack with his armies in Marstance as an active command, or if he waits until Shem-Suhor, you will train Medjay. I don't think Medjay are necessarily worth it, but attacking in Marstance certainly is. In terms of titles, your selection of titles allows your general to specialize in various types of units, such as Medjay, Sheridan, or Chariots. Though when it comes to Chariots, you have bow chariots as like your light bow chariots, those are your unique ones. You can get armored Canaanite chariots, which are heavier chariots and are better, but still, you're gonna have some issues. In terms of buildings, this is the real strength of Ramesses. He gets the Necropolis of the Honored Dead. This is a tier 5 building, but it does have lower tier versions, so you can get influence and happiness in a single building. You get the Wine Market as a tier 4 building, happiness, workforce, growth, production of all resources. Medjay Headquarters for a Medjay Production tier 5 building, with lower tier versions, I think. And then the Military Academy for recruitment slots, recruitment rank from Medjay from Ramesses Command, experience per turn, and recruit rank of generals. So he can get some very high ranks on his generals with the Military Academy, a tier 4 building. Okay, come on game. Okay, moving on to Seti. Seti starts with Lower Egypt. Now, Lower Egypt are lighter units than Upper Egypt. Upper Egypt is like closer to the source of the Nile, if you will. So Lower Egypt is close to the end of the Nile when it spills into the Mediterranean. Upper Egypt is towards the source of the Nile. Now, Upper Egyptian units, there are some medium infantry, but generally speaking, they're on the lighter side of units. In terms of his unique units, he certainly is pushing a lot of glass cannon units, if you will. Like he gets the Levy Clubmen at tier 2 that have a significant amount of armor piercing, but they are light infantry units. He does get the veteran Levy Clubmen, which are medium, or Axemen, veteran Levy Axemen, and you can get some decent enough units at tier 4 and tier 5. But early on, he's going to have a lot of units that may do some decent level of damage, but they're not going to have a decent level of durability, which can be a significant problem in a campaign. I would probably recommend using Lower Egyptian veteran spearmen quite a bit as line holders in combination with conscripts, or with Levy Axemen. Levy Clubmen in particular can be very useful to use in a campaign. Then later on you can make use of the Elite Clubmen. Seti is all about recruiting a lot of units, though he won't necessarily have the money to do just that. What is with this tooltip? Okay, so he gets the mustering office as a tier 1 building, which reduces recruitment cost by 10%, gives him a recruitment slot. He gets the recruitment administration center for extra recruitment slots, construction cost, recruitment cost reduction, but at the cost of recently recruited units or newly recruited units starting with minus 40% HP. It's a similar system to Friends of Britannia or Kugaf from Total War, though it's not global recruitment. Then he gets Seti's Royal Palace for legitimacy, morale, influence in adjacent provinces, and influence in the local province, but at the cost of diplomatic relations -5 with all factions, which is not a great situation. Then he gets the Tax Administration Palace, production of resources plus 25%, happiness -3, workforce -3. So yeah, Seti's got a bit of a complicated situation. His active command can allow him to recruit units twice as fast in a single turn, but units will start out with lower HP. If you wait until Shem-Suhor, all your armies will receive battle rewards from battle until the next Shem-Suhor. In terms of titles, he favors lower tier units and general bodyguards in battle. They also support aggression on the campaign map, preventing enemy retreat and enabling attack from march stance. So he has some campaign capabilities. He also has a pretty safe starting position where he can take a lot of sacred land in Egypt without any major faction opposing him. But at the same time, he does have a complicated situation because of his units, his economy, his buildings not necessarily being that great.
We must be ruled by reason.
Then we have Tausret, Seti's wife. She is in a much better situation. She starts with upper Egyptian units, which are more heavily armored. Still not the best armor in the world. Tausret, however, can get access to upper Egyptian spearmen at tier 3, so they will have a decent level of armor. And because of her starting position, she gets access to a significant amount of bronze, stone, and food, because she starts with her capital on the Nile. So she actually has access to a good amount of resources in her campaign very, very easily, far more easily than the vast majority of Legendary Lords or any other Legendary Lord in the game. With perhaps one major exception. Her focus is on chariots. Light chariots, bow chariots, if we're talking about them, light bow chariots. She does have some defensive units, some decent enough infantry if we're looking at it, like the Egyptian axemen. She can get those at tier 3. But Tausret is certainly focused on chariots, which isn't a great thing because they're Egyptian chariots. They don't have a great deal of durability. They're going to have some issues in battles. Now, in terms of unique buildings, she gets a bunch of resource buildings that increase the amount of resources gained percentage-wise. So she can get a lot of food, lower food recruitment costs. She can get a lot of bronze, increased armor on recruitment of units for armies and province, which is a significant benefit. These are tier 5 buildings, though there are lower tier versions as well. Keep that in mind. She gets goldsmiths that reduces gold construction cost, and once you get like every free production buildings in the province, you get a production of all resources in the province being increased, and you get a storage center for more wood and stone. So theoretically, Tausret can have the strongest economy in the game. I say theoretically because it's not true necessarily from a practical standpoint, because the resources you're gaining from a regular settlement are not necessarily that high. It's the modifiers, a lot of modifiers together that can make them very high, but that's what Tausret can do. But she's not gaining raw resources from this, keep that in mind. Now, in terms of her commands, she can command the province to give you its per turn resources production immediately, so you can get the cache of resources to help you out, or you can wait until Shamsu-Hor, and your faction will be able to instantly construct a given number of buildings for no cost. I'd say waiting for the passive effect of Shamsu-Hor is better. Well, not passive effect, but still. Then in terms of titles, her titles favor chariots, big surprise. They also provide defensive bonuses in battle and improve province management in campaign. And then finally we get to Amenmesse, who is the true economic powerhouse in the entire game, and he also has some decent armies as well, though he may be lacking in damage. So in theory, Amenmesse is the master... why is that bugged? Okay, game. Let's try this again.
I will reclaim my birthright.
When we're considering Amenmesse, he has the strongest archers in the game. He has good defensive infantry, but he's weak at charging. His commands give him an ancillary that can increase legitimacy at the cost of gold. This is not generally worth it because you have to equip that ancillary and you have to have a lot of generals to use it. So it's not really worth using, I would argue. But if you wait until Shamsu-Hor, units and buildings requiring gold will cost less of it. In terms of titles, your titles exchange gold for campaign and battle bonuses. You can use them to specialize in Nubian or Kushite units. In campaign, you can improve gold income and influence. Now, looking at Amenmesse, he's in a unique situation because very few people can get access to Nubian and Kushite units. I mean, Tausret can, but everyone else, they're going to have a long journey to go this far up the Nile, whereas you will start with them. And in point of fact, when it comes to the Kushites, you will be able to gain them for the Viceroy of Kush position that you start with. While it's not the king position, as Suppiluliuma, it is at least a position of power within the court. It gives you a gold income benefit and gives you global recruitment, or special recruitments. There's no global recruitment. What exists is special recruitment. So special recruitment works either you can gain special units through a position like the Viceroy of Kush, or Pharaoh, or Hittite king, various court actions, especially with the leader of the armies that can get special unit recruitment, or you can get units from vassals as a gift, a courtesy gift, basically. And all of those get added to the special unit recruitment pool. Now, Amenmesse has Kushite units added to that pool. Specifically, what I've seen him gain a lot are like Kushite spearmen in a campaign, and then Kushite archers as well in the campaign. Not archer militia, just regular archers, if I can find them. They are there somewhere. Anyway, so he gets the Kushite spearman as a decent enough line holder with a decent level of armor. And he gets a ton of variety in terms of archers, so he has a lot of strength when it comes to that. He also gets Nubian clubmen that have a decent amount, that have a good amount of armor piercing in their damage, though they are light infantry, so they won't have the best durability in battle. And when we're looking at these kind of club units, it's generally better to have a two-handed club unit. Those will do better in battles as opposed to sword and shield, or club and shield, if you will. So his army is not necessarily something special in terms of damage dealing, though he does have a lot of range power and he does have a lot of infantry resistance, but really it's the range power that makes his army special, which is a bit of a problem because you do run out of ammo, so you do end up having bishes in battle. However, here's what makes Amenmesse so incredibly powerful. One, he has a very safe starting position over here in the south. He does have Libyan raiders spawning very close to him in the west. That is going to be a problem, but he has relatively safe position. There are several factions over here, but you can wipe them out easily and take all of this territory. You'll have a lot of bronze, you'll have a lot of stone, you'll have a lot of food. Wood, maybe not as much, but it's not necessarily an issue for Egyptians. But here's the kicker. He gets the Kushite Delegate School, which increases production of all resources, diplomatic relations with non-Egyptian factions, tier 4 building, workforce growth. But the insane part of Amenmesse is he can build the hidden rooms. Legitimacy, happiness, bronze income, food income, stone income, wood income at the cost of gold. But he has more gold than anyone else. He has 2 gold mines in one of his starting provinces, and he has 2 starting provinces. He controls 2 settlements in each of them. He can gain control of both these provinces fully, relatively quickly in his campaign. And he has 2 gold mines in one of them. And he gets more gold than anyone else. So paying for this, in particular, being able to generate bronze out of thin air is a significant benefit that really makes his economy far stronger than anyone else. Tausret may have economic benefits modifiers, but Amenmesse just gets flat out gets a lot of money. Then he has a second economic building in terms of the gold mine labor village. He loses influence, but he gains gold. This is a second building. It's not one that replaces the regular gold building, because usually there's 1 gold production building for every other faction. He gets 2 of these gold buildings. So he can make more gold than everyone else, and then can spend that gold to get the gold mine labor, the hidden rooms. He can build these in provincial capitals, and he can build them in gold mines as well. So you can earn a significant amount of money, have a great variety of resources, and just dominate the map with that. And he also has a relatively safe starting position. Not necessarily as many sacred lands available in his campaign as Tausret or Seti, but still a fairly good position where you can become Pharaoh and dominate the campaign map. Fun fact, by the way, they're trying to hype up this idea that Tausret and Amenmesse hate each other, but in reality, in my campaign as Amenmesse, I was able to make Tausret my best friend and even have her betray her alliance with Seti, because Tausret and Seti are a power couple. They start out with a military alliance. I was able to break that through diplomacy and make Tausret my best friend in the campaign. Significant amount of power with that. Those are the Legendary Lords of Total War Pharaoh. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. I think Amenmesse is the strongest. Ursu and Suppiluliuma are also in a fairly strong position as well.